Back with a brand new week. Welcome. Proudly presented by betonline.ag. Marco D'Amico, what is good, brother? Welcome to the off-season, local off-season. NHL playoffs on in a big way, but locally, this is our off-season. What's good, man?
Man, it's could be off season for some, but there's so much going on. There's the World Championships.
Yeah.
There's still playoffs going on in the AHL. Laval Rocket off to the second round, or sorry, second round.
Second round, yeah.
Yeah, just play in first round, second round.
Correct.
You don't know anymore.
Yes.
And then you have what I think to be really fun, notwithstanding the officiating, very fun playoffs going on right now.
No kidding.
So it's definitely still busy. It's definitely still a good time, but I could definitely tell you there's 8 teams left in the playoffs right now.
Yeah.
And there are 20 plus general managers that are very busy talking to each other, setting the ground.
We're going to talk, obviously, about what's coming up with the Montreal Canadiens as it relates to their salary cap space and a big ticket item and what the plan is exactly. That's coming up in just a second. But right now, as Marco alluded to, we're still very much in the thick of the race for the Stanley Cup playoffs. And would you look here? BetOnline.ag has your Conn Smythe nominees and the odds-on favorite. I mean, is this it? Is the streak going to end? Connor McDavid at plus 500 is your odds-on Stanley Cup playoff MVP. Your boy Mikko Rantanen is next, followed by McDavid's running mate as these boys hook up, making Jack Eichel look flat-footed. And McDavid to Draisaitl. Edmonton wins. Draisaitl plus 900. What do you got for me in the second round of the playoffs as a potential legitimate Conn Smythe award winner, Marco? What do you got?
Yeah, I'm not going to blow anybody away with this, but this,
Yeah.
and Shaun, you could vouch for this, but I had Mikko Rantanen at the beginning of the playoffs.
Yes, you did. Yes,
I had Dallas at the beginning of the playoffs. To me, what they're doing is incredible. And I remember we had this conversation. If they get Heiskanen back and they get a healthy, like Robertson starts getting healthy. Oh Lord.
Yes.
Right? Because they beat Colorado with arguably 2 of their best players out, if not one, 2 of their top 3 or 5 best players out, which is insane. It would be the equivalent of the Montreal Canadiens beating the Washington Capitals without, Cole Caulfield and Lane Hudson. Good luck. So
crazy.
Exactly. So it just absolute bonkers. And so for me, Mikko Rantanen has been the best and most clutch player. So I'm gonna continue with that and see how it goes. But I honestly think that we're headed toward a Dallas Edmonton Western Conference final, and what a final that would be in the Western Conference.
No kidding. If you're back into Mikko Rantanen to win the Conn Smythe at plus 700 at betonline.ag, a $10 wager on that brings you back at $70. You're looking for a little bit more of a long shot, but still with the likeliness of winning. And listen, I mean, we have a favorite who's a Canadian, plays on a Canadian team. Don't laugh at me. What about Connor Hellebuck at plus 4,000? Now, listen. I understand he's been very dramatic in goal. He does have a shutout, so maybe he's found something. I don't know. It's obviously a very much a literal gamble, but plus 4,000, a $10 bet on Connor Hellebuck to win you the Conn Smythe gets you 400. Pipe dream or worth risking $10, Marco?
Listen, I'm gonna have to call that a pipe dream. It's just which is insane to say for probably a guy who's going to win the Vezina for the second year in a row.
Exactly.
But it's just incredible inconsistency. He gets a shutout, but then he let in 6 goals. The game before, and then it's just it's very hard to find a middle ground.
Correct.
It's just, to me, again, it's unfortunate, but we'll see what comes of it. I think their series with Dallas is definitely not over. I think it's going to be ground and pound for a while. But to shut out the Dallas Stars is not an easy thing to do.
No kidding. It's especially if you're looking at both sides. I like the Rantanen pick.
I'll give you this.
Yeah.
If Winnipeg gets through Dallas, it's because of Connor Hellebuck.
Agreed. And that plus 4,000 won't be 4,000 if we're here next week talking about Winnipeg on the cusp, right?
Oh, yeah.
But interesting timing, because I want to talk about goaltending. Let's talk about the $10.5 million man with the Montreal Canadiens. Let's talk about Carey Price. with the Montreal Canadiens salary cap space here and Carey Price in year 7 of an 8-year deal.
Yeah.
His UFA year is next season. Obviously, he's retired and not playing.
Yeah.
But what do we make of this? Because there's been a confusing narrative around. You can go to your friend's house, have an outdoor barbecue, and you're talking hockey. One of your pals, Canadians have so much cap space. They're going to be one of the fat cats in hockey.
No.
Marco, walk us through where the Canadians' cap space is, and let's talk about Carey Price's $10.5 million. What are they going to do with that?
Yeah, well, for a lot of people are like, oh, the Canadians. I saw, I think BPM Sport had a segment on this with George Larac and Stéphane Gonzalez, where they were saying,
Sure.
why not offer sheet a guy like Mason McTavish
I
at
saw that.
9.16
Yeah.
mil?
What a
And
dream.
it would cost you a first, a second, and a third. And would Anaheim really want to throw that kind of money at him? And the idea is you could do that, but the Canadians don't even have the cap space to do that. And a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean? Don't they have all this cap space? Not really. They got double due in this situation. So on the front end, they were using long-term injury reserve this season, right? And
Yep.
then a couple of players, Lane Hudson most notably, hit their bonuses. This is the thing. This is the double-edged sword when you use long-term injury reserve and you're a young team.
Right.
Any and all bonuses earned, because you're over the cap now, right? You're using LTIR to go over the cap. It's not free cap space. You're going over it. So they give you this relief. But if any of your young players or any of your older players, 35 and up, earn bonuses, those bonuses go to next year.
I see.
So, for example, the Canadians were projected to have about 10 million in cap space, with notwithstanding Carey Price's LTIR, but with all the bonuses that were accrued from Slafkovsky, from Hudson, it's actually now 8 million. They lost 2 million because of bonuses. Now, the problem is the Canadians want to add to their roster this year.
Yeah.
So unless, and we'll get into the topic of what they want to do with Patrick Laine. A lot of people want to see him bought out. I don't think the Canadians are going to do that. Some would like to see the Canadians retain 50% of his salary and trade him. No. I don't see that happening either. So, we'll just hold our horses there. But all things being consistent, the Canadians have about 8.5 mil in real cap space for this summer. They have to re-sign a couple of players, Emil Heineman and I believe Jaden Struble. Minimum salary is probably going to be about $1 million for each, so bring it down to $6 million. You're not going to be able to bring in an impact player $6 million. And then the factor is you can go over the cap in the summer by 10%, but you have to be cap compliant by day one.
Right.
Or you can use long-term injury reserve. Now, the Canadians, even last summer, did not want to use long-term injury reserve. Even after they acquired Patrick Laine, they did not want to use long-term injury reserve. They were hoping that they would be able to pull off a trade to shed a contract, which they were unable to do. And then Laine got injured and they were forced to use LTIR. From what I'm being told, the Canadians would like to avoid using LTIR at all costs. And in fact, moving Carey Price's contract is actually the best way to do that. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, well, why can't they just spend on the LTIR and that's it? It's free cash space. It is not free cash space.
Yeah. So can you clarify that? Because I think that's a common misconception around that. Like, $10.5 million. They're not using it to spend on a player who produces for them on the ice. Therefore, they can stash that money. Yeah. And then the misconception is the $10.5 million is now freed up money. So that's how people get to the point where, Marco says they have 8. They put Carey Price on LTIR. 10 plus 8 is, Marco, they have $18.5 million now.
Yeah.
But that's not true.
No, it's not, in the sense that, like, first of all, you have to get as close to the salary cap as possible before putting the player on long-term injury reserve so that you can maximize the full 10.5 million. If you're 2 million short and then you put Carey Price on LTIR, you actually only have 8.5. Right. So that's the situation. And further to that, when you're using long-term injury reserve, you don't accrue cap space. So, for example, $3 million in cap space at the beginning of the season is actually worth more at the trade deadline than $10.5 million in LTIR throughout the entirety of the season. Why? Because if you keep $3 million and everyone's salary continues to get paid. That 3 million becomes bigger and bigger and bigger as you get to the end of the season because it's
Mm-hmm.
prorated. So it
Mm-hmm.
allows you, for example, to bring in a contract or a couple of players that at the beginning of the season would have put you over the cap, but at the end of the season, their salaries are 1/8,
Fair,
right? So you
fair,
can
fair.
bring in that salary without it actually damaging you. If you use LTIR, for example, I could give you a direct example. If you want to bring in a guy that makes 7 million and you want to bring in a depth player that makes 3 million, you can't do that at the beginning of the season. You can only do that towards the end of the season, right? That's
Yeah,
how it would work. On
yeah.
LTIR, you could do that, but then it would limit you from being able to move players up and down. So
So,
that's one aspect of it. The second aspect is bonus carryover. And we talked
mm,
about this earlier, right?
mm,
The Canadians next season are going to have Lane Hudson, Ivan Demidov,
yeah,
Oliver Kapanen, and potentially David Reinbacher. That's the potential for $5 million in bonus overages for next year.
yeah,
And Ivan Demidov has a serious chance of hitting. He's the big fish in this situation where
correct.
he could hit up to 3 million in bonuses. And to me, he's the one that's the likeliest. Well, I mean, Hudson obviously, but Hudson's already,
Yeah,
he's capped. I think he can only earn 1.5 mil over 2 years. He's already
okay.
earned one. So he could potentially gain another 500,000 potentially. He likely will. And then
Crazy.
you have Demidov, and then you have Reinbacher. So if Reinbacher plays a significant amount of games, he's going to get,
Yeah.
500,000, six
I
hundred thousand.
noticed you didn't put Logan Mayu's name in there.
I don't remember if Mayu has bonuses. I'd have
Okay,
to
we'll have
double
to look
check.
that up. Okay,
Yeah, I'd have
sure,
to
fair
double
enough.
check.
Yep,
But not if he does, it's not to the degree that
the others. Okay, fair,
Demidov or a
fair.
Hudson or so. Those are the big three guys, and then there's obviously Oliver Kapanen, who's got a couple 100,000 as well.
Wow,
So,
so
but
complicated this
this
stuff,
is why
man.
LTIR is going the way of the dodo because the cap is going up so quickly, right?
Yeah,
So
right.
you're going to
Got
see
you.
teams less reliant on this.
So
But
what's a realistic option? Like how do you envision the Canadians handling the Carey Price contract
see,
here?
this is the thing, right? So there's going to be an argument for letting him just write out the last year of his contract and so be it and use LTIR and that's it.
Okay.
Because he's done so much for the organization and this and that. I agree that sentiment, I'm not going to discount it from fans that just want to see him finish off his career with one franchise and that's it.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, do you think that, the do you think the Detroit Red Wings gave a hoot about sending over Pavel Datsuk's contract to Arizona?
Come on now.
No.
How many teams has Shea Weber played for at this point? You know?
Well, okay, how
You know?
many okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly my point, right? So you
Yeah.
saw the Chicago Blackhawks acquire Shea Weber's contract for the last year so that they could reach the cap floor
Yeah.
last season as they, siphoned off a bunch of players left and right.
Yeah.
So that's the exact same kind of team the Canadians are going to have to target because I believe they have to trade Carey Price's contract. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, well, he has a no movement clause. Maybe he'll say no. No player on long-term injury reserve that is retired has ever refused a trade, nor would they, because then the team would just basically contest the contract and be like, well, then
Yes.
retire.
So do you
Um,
think they're going to do that though? Do you think that's a viable as opposed because you presented two options? Maybe he rides off into the sunset, always a
mhm.
Canadian, forever a Canadian, or does he get that kind of Chris Pronger, Shea Weber kind of treatment and teams that need to minimum, get to the floor?
Yeah,
That's maybe
'cause that's
the
that's going
most
to be the
realistic
thing.
option.
That's going to be the thing this year, right? There's going to be a lot of teams. The cap is going up in such an aggressive way, right? It's going
Yeah.
up by like what, 8 mil?
That's a
About
lot for the
7?
poppers of the league, man.
Yeah, that's a lot
Yeah.
considering like some teams, didn't necessarily get the outcome that they wanted. The league revenue is off the charts, but obviously big markets are the ones pushing that, right? So I don't foresee, for example, a team like Anaheim magically spending to the cap,
Right.
right? They're gonna have
Right.
to re-sign some players like McTavish, for example. They may try to go after some unrestricted free agents, but if they strike out, they still have to hit. They still have to get there, and then they have to leave themselves some loose. You're talking about them. You'd be looking at the same thing with like a team like Columbus. If
Hmm.
there's a team that starts to deconstruct, right? If there's a team that decides to start blowing it up in their rebuild, they
Yeah.
may want to siphon off some players, and they may need a contract just to hit the floor because they know that they're going to continue that process at the next year's trade deadline. and you want to be able to trade players without having to worry about the salary cap floor, those are the kinds of teams that the Canadiens are going to have to target. But realistically, trading away Carey Price's contract, a lot of people are like, oh, the Canadiens are going to have to like give tons of assets. I don't necessarily think so. If a team wants to hit the salary cap floor, consider this. Carey Price's cap hit is $10.5 million. July 1st, okay, just consider this.
Yeah.
His total earnings for the last year of his contract is $7.5 million, right? So it's when we do the cap hit, it's the average over the life of the contract, right? So over the life of the contract, he earned, I believe, $84 million.
Correct.
Hence 10.5.
Yes.
But it was front loaded.
Yes.
So now what's going on is at the beginning, at the last year of his contract, it's 7.5. It's lower. To top that off, July 1st, 5.5 million of that 7.5 is paid out in bonuses. So as of July 1st, it's actually $2.5 million, or sorry, $2 million in salary, and it's insured. So, I'm unaware of, I don't think signing bonuses are covered by insurance, but I know salary is.
Right.
And so that $2 million would be salary. So the Canadiens would be able to pay the signing bonus and then be able to move him.
Okay. Because he's due a $5.5 million signing bonus. Now, as you alluded to, the first 2 years, he got $26 million in bonuses in the first 2 years of that 8-year deal.
Yeah.
And then it started to dwindle down from that 13 to 8.75 to 11 to 6.75 to 6.5 and 5.5 in the final 2 years.
Yeah.
And going into the 8th and final year of the deal.
Exactly. So as of July 1st, he becomes an incredibly attractive contract to acquire if you're just looking to add salary to pad the roster in case there's ever a situation where you have to move a big salary player for futures, and then you don't have to turn around and make a subsequent move to get over the salary cap. Here's your buffer. Right. And so I don't think the Canadiens are necessarily going to have to pay through the nose to move a contract like that. I know that there's this old connotation about it, but there is going to be at least 3 or 4 teams that are going to need that kind of situation, especially if they strike out with free agents.
Fair point.
This is the reality of the transition. And I know a lot of us are still in the mindset, and it obviously lasted 5 years, but in the mindset of a flat cap, it's no longer the case.
That's right.
And so for 1 year, there will be teams interested, just like Chicago was interested in acquiring Shea Weber's contract. It's just who will likely be determined closer to July 1st than today.
$123.5 million in total career earnings.
Well, I think Canadiens fans will tell you, I doubt there's many that don't think he was worth that money.
He was worth it to me. He was, as I've said for years, regardless of, the fact that, yes, the Canadiens didn't have, an equivalent to a Nick Suzuki or Cole Caulfield in front of them.
How about this? How about this statement? If the Canadiens had Nick Suzuki during Carey Price's time with Thomas Plekanec as a second-line center,
they're much more consistent.
I think
can never assume championship. I can never assume championship.
I think there's a Stanley Cup in there.
Okay.
Prime Nick Suzuki on those like 2014, 2015 teams.
Yeah.
I think there may have been a cup in there.
Yeah, listen, I've said for years, he was, in his heyday, he was the Canadiens' version of Connor McDavid. It's who they had. That's who they had. They had a superstar in goal.
He is the reason why the Canadiens did not rebuild when they needed to.
You can follow Marco D'Amico on X at MN D'Amico and check him out at RG Media where they're hiring. So if this is something you want to explore in terms of a career, a pivot, perhaps, here's what they call an opportunity. Thank you, Marco.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.